Thank you, Congressman Jackson. All right, next up we have Lane Dickson. Lane Dickson is a principal at the Ferguson Group, where he represents water, energy, natural resources, and municipal clients before Congress and federal agencies. Mr. Dickson's Washington experience also includes nearly a decade in federal affairs. He also has served as the chair of the Government Relations Task Force for the Large Public Power Council and vice chair of the Federal Affairs Committee for the National Water Resources Association. Lane holds a degree in soil and water science from the University of California, Davis, and an MBA from George Mason University. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Lane Dickson.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me. I'm going to get myself situated here, make sure I got my slides up and everything. Thanks so much for having me. Brittany, thank you so much for the introduction, and to Aspen for having me here today. My first time in Amarillo, so really appreciate it, and I'm really enjoying to get to see your city and region. And really looking forward to learning a lot today throughout this conference. So, as Brittany mentioned, I'm with the Ferguson Group. I'm a principal at the Ferguson Group, having recently left the U.S. Senate on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, where I kind of handled all the Western water issues. At TFG, we really focus on representing Western water, primarily irrigated agriculture in the West, but also some municipal and industrial water districts and things like that. And I know I once was talking with a Texan and made the comment that I was just happy to be out of D.C. and back out west, because I'm from California, Northern California originally, and I was corrected by him, and he told me that, son, Texas is in the South. So I don't know where you all stand here in Amarillo on that question, but to me, if you're a reclamation state and if you're under the prior appropriations doctrine, it's the West. So when I talk about Western water, forgive me if you're in the Texas is in the South camp. To me, Western water includes Texas. So that's where I am on that. So this first slide, I always like to start with this one because it's a good backdrop, I think, to a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today, which is infrastructure and action that's been taken on the federal level on infrastructure. This is a picture of the Memorial Bridge. It goes across the Potomac River between Arlington National Cemetery and the Lincoln Memorial, and it's this is obviously a very nice picture. It's beautiful, but what you can't tell by looking at it is that they need about $300 million worth of repairs to that bridge just for it to be safe for cars to continue to go over. And so I think that need on things like our Memorial Bridge is the backdrop that led to so much focus on infrastructure early in the 117th Congress, and I'll be talking a little bit about that. Before we do jump kind of fully into the infrastructure discussion, I think it's important to, where do I point it, I wonder? Now watch, it's going to go like a ton of them. I think it's good to take a look back and kind of remember the backdrop and the context that we are in Congress, especially the context coming into the beginning of the 117th Congress. So I think really the big piece of context as we entered the 117th Congress in January was one of very slim margins and unlikely power brokers. This slide shows how evenly divided the House and Senate are. They remain now. The Senate is divided 50-50 for the first time since 2001, and really only the third time in history. So it is a big deal. It's not a normal set of circumstances where it's a 50-50 Senate and the make or break vote. Pretty much each time is the vice president. In the House, it's just as equally divided. It's depending on presidential appointments and resignations and all the things that come with the House. There's a 4 or 5 vote margin in the House. That means pretty much any one individual. In the House, it takes 4 or 5, but that's like 1 Senate. I mean, that's not too hard to piece together a 4-person coalition. So any faction can really hold up legislation and cause that to go down. I put pictures of Senators Manchin and Sinema up here. It's kind of funny to me. I worked with both of them for a really long time. I was always on the Republican side, but did a lot of work in Arizona, and then Joe Manchin was the ranking member of the Energy Committee when I was up there. So I have a lot of experience with them, and to watch them kind of become household names, the senator from West Virginia is kind of ironic, but this whole this kind of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party versus the conservative wing in this evenly divided environment is one that is really telling and really makes up and is why we are where we are right now, I think, with infrastructure and with other things. To add to that, there's still the pretty partisan environment in D.C. It started off with a bang on January 6th with the riots and everything. I was still on the Hill at that point. It really was a scary situation at the time, so there's just a lot going on. And regardless of all of that, and even with the kind of disagreements, even within the Democratic Party, they did come to some. They did kind of, despite this whole really tenuous control on power from either side, the Congress was able to come together and spend basically $3 trillion, over $3 trillion in the first year. So that's a pretty big deal. We're talking in trillions now. We were talking in billions, and that seemed like a lot of money for a long time. So this is a significant amount of money. Before I kind of get more in depth on the infrastructure side of things, I think it's important to mention that the first action was a partisan one. It was just the Democrats acting unilaterally to pass the American Rescue Plan. That was really aimed at COVID, but it does have an important kind of context in the infrastructure bill discussion because it provided states with a lot of extra funds. Many states have surpluses because of these funds from the federal government or added to their surpluses, and those are going to be important funds as folks pursue federal infrastructure funding that require a non-federal cost share match. But the big one that I want to talk a little bit about because of the impact and the hopefully long-term benefit to water infrastructure, water supply, water conservation is the infrastructure bill. You guys probably saw some of this, but this bill it's a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. It goes by many names these days. The real name is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA. A lot of people call it the the bipartisan infrastructure law now, or there's all these different names. So I'll just call it the infrastructure package. But it makes some really large investments in some of the failing infrastructure that we've really been seeing across the country. About 60% of it is for transportation infrastructure, so highways, roads, and bridges. That's the vast majority, and that was a huge driving factor in getting it done. But it goes well beyond that. You can see the list up here, but electric grid investments, broadband, and of course, importantly for this group and for what I do in DC, water infrastructure. So the next slide, we'll kind of get into some of the specifics about what was in there for water and water-related, and agriculture, irrigated agriculture. But I do want to just take a quick second and talk about the coalition that I was involved with and that really helped drive some of the Western water, the pieces to this bill. When we talk about water and water infrastructure, it's really easy for the supply side of that equation, especially when it comes to irrigated agriculture, to be just buried under the massive needs and the massive infrastructure investments needed for municipal water. Places like, the headlines in Flint, Michigan, they need hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. A lot of the big cities on the eastern seaboard have old infrastructure, and it's really easy for the supply side and the irrigated agricultural side of the water equation to be lost. And because of that, we brought early in this debate on infrastructure, even before the 2020 election actually, a coalition came together that included the Family Farm Alliance, where the Ferguson group represents the Family Farm Alliance. It's kind of a coalition of irrigated agriculture focused farmers and ranchers. The National Water Resources Association, Western Growers Alliance, for those who are familiar with that, mostly kind of produce in the western U.S., the California Farm Bureau and some of the other farm bureaus, and the Association of California Water Agencies. And those last two were important given how much of a driver the California delegation can be on some of these water issues, to bring them in, but also to balance the coalition between agriculture and municipal interests. So with that group, we were able to come up with a balanced package, and that was supported by over 220 ag and water organizations. And that's a really big deal in Washington. That's a powerful statement when you can put down specific priorities for water infrastructure on a piece of paper and get 220 people to sign, 220 entities to sign it. That carries a lot of weight and is a really big part of why we were able to be successful in our effort to get water supply provisions in there. Ultimately, the bill passed bipartisan nature, much more. It was 69-30 in the Senate, pretty significant margins there, a little less in the House, where it was mostly passed by Democrats, but some of them peeled off for a variety of reasons, and Republicans had to make that up. So as somebody that's always worked on the Republican side of the aisle, but is pro-infrastructure investment at the federal level, I like to think that the 13 Republicans that came over to vote for it were the reason it passed, rather than the 200 plus Democrats that voted for it. But all right, let's jump into this thing a little bit. All right, so the first pot of funding that want to talk a little bit about that's in the infrastructure bill is the Bureau of Reclamation funding. So the list is up there. I'm not going to go through all of it. Some of these items really may not apply to you in this region because of the lack of reclamation projects. Some of them are specific to the federal project, but there's a number of programs here that could be useful that I want to talk a little bit about, and just make sure that you have some information to the extent you're looking for federal funds to pursue water conservation, water infrastructure items. Bureau of Reclamation total was appropriated $8.3 billion in the infrastructure package. That's about $1.6 billion a year, which is very significant in the Bureau of Reclamation budget context. That $1.6 billion is about double what their normal annual budget is. So this is a huge amount of money for them, and can go a really long way to dealing with some priority Western water issues. For folks in this region, I'm going to draw your attention primarily to three of the provisions on here. The one is the top one, the $1.15 billion for water storage. A big portion of that, frankly, is dedicated to some large surface storage projects, dams and reservoirs that are already underway under the Bureau of Reclamation storage program. But there is some new, there was also some new authority provided in the bill on what we were calling small storage. So, when we talk about storage, in almost every context on here, we're talking about not just dams and reservoirs, but groundwater storage and conveyance that allows for additional storage or either directly or in lieu storage in the groundwater context. So it's a little bit broader than just straight water storage and can be helpful in a lot of instances. So the bill created a new program at the Bureau of Reclamation. We call it the Small Storage Program because it includes eligibility for projects that are between 2,000 and 30,000 acre feet. So smaller in terms of the water supply benefits compared to the million acre foot reservoirs that are going up some places. But this is significant. It matches what the Title 16 program at the Bureau of Reclamation. It's a straight 25% grant with very little kind of strings attached. I mean, everything in the federal world has some strings attached, right? But as it goes, the Title 16 program, this was modeled after, and we expect it to be stood up exactly the same, is a pretty streamlined program that can be accessed to help with water storage and delivery. The other program that I think could be of great use here for folks that are seeking federal funds is the Water Smart program. Some of you may have experience with that program already. In all of these instances, in small storage and in Water Smart, both of them are for non-federal infrastructure. You can put it on federal projects, but again, it's designed to help support non-federal water infrastructure and in any reclamation state. So again, back to my earliest discussion, Texas is a reclamation state, certainly. So the Water Smart program, there's a number of different kind of tiers off of that. Actually, they just opened one funding opportunity yesterday for drought contingency planning. So if you are looking for your district to do any kind of drought contingency planning, this might be an opportunity to get up to $200,000 to do that work. For the most part, all Water Smart grants are 50-50 cost share, so you have to come up with 50% of the cost. But it's a pretty efficient program. It's a mature program, and it's kind of a well-oiled machine. I'll talk a little bit more about implementation and some of the challenges that we could see in getting this much money out the door at the federal level. But we expect this Water Smart program will be pretty efficient, just given its track record. So that's an important place to look at if you're interested in this federal funding. The other one I would mention, just at a high level, and I'm actually really excited to learn more about what's going on in the later panel. But there is a beginning of discussions about whether produced water can be another area that the Bureau of Reclamation Title 16 program, which is their water recycling program, or their desalination program, could help. Right now, it's really been used almost exclusively in Southern California for treated water for sewage into groundwater reinjection projects, but people are starting to broaden that out, and it can't be a California-only program forever. There are actually a lot more folks in Texas are starting to utilize it on the municipal front, and there's a lot of efforts to kind of broaden that program out. So I would just flag that, and if that's something that's of interest and kind of starts to grow in this region, I'd love to hear about it personally. I think it would be a good way to broaden that program and to put it to its best use. The last thing I would mention on the reclamation side of things is that the infrastructure bill also provided a new broad-based authority for reclamation to provide technical and financial assistance for groundwater recharge, aquifer storage and recovery, and source water substitution that results in groundwater conservation. We don't know exactly how it's going to be utilized, but it's a new program. It's a new line item at the Bureau of Reclamation, and obviously there could be some benefit to those types of investments for your district. So keep an eye on that. I would encourage everybody to watch that process and make sure that as it's coming together, it's useful to you. You never know, when the Bureau can be helpful, and I think especially from the funding standpoint, I appreciated the Congressman's Reagan quote, and I'll kind of refrain from using the one about help from Washington, but maybe you all know it, at least the folks that were around back then. It wasn't just reclamation that got significant funding. USDA programs, their conservation programs, along with the rural development programs, got significant funding. The two I put up there are the watershed and flood prevention operations. Folks may be familiar with that program, the PL 566 program. That's one that it has been very successful for getting help undertaking water conservation projects, everything from piping of open canals to modernization of irrigation systems, pressurization, all these different things. The knock on the program, frankly, is that you have to kind of undertake this watershed plan first, and it can be a little bit of a beast, very bureaucratic in some instances. It really depends on the personnel in your local office. But once you've done that, there's a good certain kind of stream of funds that can help you make some really good, important investments in your system. So if you're looking at programs, I'd encourage you to look at this PL 566. Happy to get you more information for those that are interested. There's also some emergency programs that are coming out that are designed to respond to either current or expected emergency situations that are impacting water supply. Obviously, drought is a huge one of those. Drought all over the West. Not hard to come up with kind of a potential emergency on the horizon related to water supply. That's in the rural development kind of portion of USDA, and is another good opportunity. The last one I would flag, and there's some other ones up there, the SRF programs, which are more geared to drinking water, but the states have a lot of discretion there. The states run those programs. They're about to get a big bucket of cash to run their state revolving fund programs. And depending on, and I'm not familiar with the Texas program, but they have a lot of discretion to be more flexible. So some states have been able to incorporate irrigated agriculture into their programs. Others have been more focused on drinking water and things like that. But there's a lot of money coming there that way, and you should be looking at that if it's of interest. The last one I would mention on the federal side is the Army Corps of Engineers Environmental Infrastructure Program, only because Texas has a statewide authorization to access funds for those programs. That program's been effectively shut down for about a decade. I won't kind of get into the reasons why, but it's been really hard for any program that hasn't been previously funded to access funds from that program. That's changed in the infrastructure bill for the first time, I think it is in 12 years, and then the annual appropriations bill that's forthcoming is also expected to allow new starts and new programs to be funded. So that's an important funding program. The logical next question that everybody always asks is, that's great that all this money is going in there, but how do we get it, right? I mean, that's the real question. And I would just make a couple observations. One is, there are going to be challenges. This is a lot of money. The Bureau of Reclamation, but all the federal agencies have to gear up. They have to build capacity in terms of employees and things like that. There's going to be issues with federal cost shares, supply chains that everything's more expensive, and they have new Build America, Buy America provisions in that bill. Environmental compliance, obviously, at the federal level can be a beast. And so, there's going to be some bumps along the way, and you need to view this as a marathon. It's not a go out and grab your money bag and then figure out what to do with it. There is going to be a lot of competition for these dollars, so I'd say anybody that's interested in federal funding, be sharpening your pencils. It's a common mistake that I see folks kind of come forward with concepts as opposed to projects. They really, despite how much money this seems like, there is a lot of need, and these are going to be highly competitive dollars. So sharpen your pencils. We have 5 years of pretty certain funding here, so there is time to get those projects really developed and buttoned down, and to go after some of this investment. And the last thing I would say, my email will be up here at the end, and Brittany and Aspen know how to get a hold of me. If there are sticking points that you're facing as you're going through this process, let your congressional delegation and everybody else know all these, what's going on, us lobbyist types too, because we want to know so we can go back and look at how to fix it. You need me to wrap? Let me just do real quick. Looking forward, there is quite a bit left on the agenda. First and foremost, they have to pass another continuing resolution to keep the government funded past Friday. So that would be a good place to start, probably, is to do that. But once they do that, there's a really crowded agenda. They're going to be doing a Water Resources Development Act bill, the WRDA. That's that's on a 2-year cycle, and it funds all the Army Corps of Engineers programs. That usually carries another Western water-focused bill with it, just by the sheer politics of it and the size of it, and that's something that's under development too. So we're expecting drought and water supply legislation coming out of being developed in the Senate and the House right now. That's going to be emerging in the next month or so, and 2 things to keep on the agenda. Obviously, Farm Bill is of real interest. That's kicking off this year with their kind of oversight activities on that and their investigations. Next year, that'll be full, in full steam. So be getting ready for your priorities there. Start funneling those in to your folks. So I will leave it there. The congressman spoke actually quite a bit about the regulatory agenda. That is a real thing. This is the year we're going to see that accelerate. And on the administrative side, I think that there'll be a lot of work there in addition to the infrastructure bill implementation. And I would just leave, but kind of end by saying, I started with the backdrop and the kind of political context, and I'm going to end with it because in just 1 year, it's completely changed, right? It was all infrastructure, trying to figure out a path forward on all these big priorities of President Biden, and trying to keep his own party together. And now there's so much more going on. We have a Supreme Court nomination that's going to take up a lot of time and a lot of energy in the Senate. That's going to be a huge priority. You add to that Senator Lujan from New Mexico is out right now. He had a stroke and isn't expected back for 6 weeks. And so they don't have a majority. So all these things, and all in the meanwhile, all the members are getting into election mode. So, and I had to put Putin up there too, because of course, right, things could change. It could be changing right now, and all of a sudden, everything's a crapshoot. So, anyway, that's all. Sorry to go over it on time. I don't think we probably have answers or time for questions, but I'll be around. Please reach out. Come talk to me, or just find me by email or phone call later, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have.